That's great. Thank you. Well, hi, everybody, and welcome to today's Gradulting Workshop. The title of the workshop is Plagiarism Prevention. So I'm glad that some of you are here with us in Zoom, and I know some of you are watching this on YouTube. So you are very wise to come to this workshop today. My name is Debbie McCutsky, and I'm the coordinator of services and programs for graduate student legal aid. I use she, her pronouns. And back to plagiarism. So some students believe that summarizing or paraphrasing a source is all that is required to avoid plagiarism. Well, that's not quite true, and that's why we're offering this workshop today. And if you are charged by the university for plagiarism, there are consequences, and it doesn't matter if the plagiarism is intentional or accidental. So we will be talking more about that in a few minutes. Before we get started, I have a few notes to share with you today. Automatic closed captioning has been enabled. We welcome your questions and your comments, so please post them in the chat for everyone to see. The speaker will take questions throughout the workshop if they apply to what she's talking about. And for sure, we will answer them all by the end of the workshop. Near the end of the workshop, we'll post a 6-second survey. And I know you have 6 seconds to answer just 4 questions. So please just take a few seconds to do that. And finally, we will email the slides and the recording and any other materials that we have from this workshop to everyone who registered. So you don't have to worry about taking screenshots, making notes, because you will get the slides. So in addition to the Gradulting Workshop Series, Legal Aid provides other important services. Legal consultations for just general legal issues like tenant-landlord problems, legal consultations for immigration issues, advocacy for those who are charged by the university, notary services, and if you want more information about any of these services, you can visit our website, call our office, or email us. So I am pleased to start off the workshop by introducing the Graduate Legal Aid Director and Attorney. His name is William Zachariah Mundy, also known as Zach. So Zach, please tell us why legal aid or how legal aid can help students who get charged with plagiarism.
Of course, and thank you, Debbie. And the most important thing to know is that when it comes to charges from the university, we're here to help. And so we can provide a range of services from simple advising all the way through having one of our student advocates actually represent you in the hearing process that the Office of Student Conduct can initiate when they bring charges against you. You're going to learn in just a minute from Dr. Linda McCree about all the many ways that you may make mistakes when it comes to plagiarism and self-plagiarism. And there's a whole wide range of issues from failing to properly cite or just copy and pasting and not using quotation marks. And she's the expert on that. So she'll get into everything about that. But the important thing is just let us know when you receive a notice from the Office of Student Conduct, because our student advocates can advise you throughout the process from that first initial interview to your to when you receive the initial offer of what your sanction may be, which as a graduate student can be quite severe. Plagiarism can lead to suspension or even expulsion from the university. Expulsion and certainly expulsion, and in most cases suspension, will also lead to issues with your visa if you are an international student. And so there are serious potential sanctions, and that's why this workshop is really one of our most important workshops that you are making a good decision to attend here or maybe watch on YouTube later. But we are very lucky to have Dr. Linda McCree with us. She's the Director of Academic and Professional Development at the Graduate School. and she's been directing the Graduate School Writing Center since 2014. She's taught a number of different courses, writing and English courses here at the university. And she also serves as the co-chair of the Consortium on Graduate Communication. And with that, I will hand it off to Dr. McCree and thank her for joining us today.
Thank you, Zach and Debbie, and thanks everybody for being here. Give me 1 second while I start my screen share. Sorry to do this. I just practiced and we have to redo it. And as Debbie said, I'm happy to answer questions. Really, I think the point of this is to give students an opportunity to ask the questions that they have. So I have a lot of slides and a lot of things to explain, but please just feel free to, at any point, turn on your mic and ask a question or put it in the chat. If I can't see it, somebody from Graduate Legal Aid can read it out to me. And then I hope to have questions at the end as well. And then there's my email on the first slide there, and I can put my email in the chat as well. And if you have questions, I am happy to try and answer them. All right. So as Debbie and Will and Zach already said, the idea here is to talk about avoiding accidental plagiarism. Kind of avoiding plagiarism in general would be good too. And I think students sometimes think that if they've been accused of plagiarism, that it's been accidental, that they didn't mean it intentionally. And I absolutely agree that is that's what's often happens to students that I see who have been referred to me from the Office of Student Conduct and accused of plagiarism, that it is often a misunderstanding. It's very, very rarely malicious intent. So really the point of this is to talk through how some of the mechanisms of good citation work so that you can avoid plagiarism. So you probably have already heard something about the Code of Academic Integrity at the university. I'm just going to talk about a little of these things, and actually some of these things are on a brochure that Zach and I put together a few years ago, and then I think Debbie's going to mail to you later, but here are some highlights, right? Kind of just what is academic integrity, just so that we're all starting out on the same page. As a graduate student, you've joined an academic community, and the pursuit of knowledge is a fundamental goal of that community. And so communities all have values, and one of the values, particularly in an American setting, of the academic community, is that we're all honest, that we're all honest in our academic work, that what we say is ours is ours, that when we use numbers from our data, that data is correct and accurate. And that's just a fundamental value of higher education in America and other places as well. So Maryland specifically has what we refer to as a code of academic integrity that actually seeks to codify what those values are, right? And it says that in that code, these are the things that we think are wrong, that they are failures of our commitment to that academic integrity: cheating, fabrication, facilitating academic dishonesty, so helping someone else do it, plagiarism, and self-plagiarism. We're really going to talk about plagiarism and self-plagiarism. The cheating, fabrication, and facilitation are usually happen on exams and things like that, not necessarily in your writing. So we're going to focus on plagiarism and a little bit about self-plagiarism. So what is plagiarism? You could probably all define this, right? It's presenting the words or the ideas of another, whether that's from an article, from a website, from a classmate, as your own work, right? This often happens when you're not citing your information, that is not acknowledging the source of the information, or not acknowledging the words, right? Or often it's not acknowledging the ideas. Usually we're pretty good at realizing we should be saying, well, if these are the exact words of somebody, then we should cite them, we should quote them. But sometimes we're not as clear on when if it's someone else's ideas, do we need to do that? So how do you avoid plagiarism? The simple answer, if there was a simple answer, is to always properly cite any words, any ideas, any images, any data, anything that you use from a source, anything that didn't come out of your own head or your own lab, your own data from your lab, in your assignments, your projects, your paper. So if the ideas or the words didn't come from you, you need a citation. And you'll see the back of this guide, which I'm actually going to talk to you about, to flip over to the back. So then that's kind of a big picture, right? But how do you actually do that, right? So when I talk to students who've been accused of plagiarism, what are the things that they often tell me? Often it's that they did it at the last minute, right? They were rushing to finish and they just weren't careful, or they just grabbed things from the internet, or they meant to put in their citations later and they forgot, right? So starting your assignments early, keeping track of your sources is one way to make sure that you're not going to plagiarize things, right? Being careful about your work. Sometimes students don't know everything. There's an assumption that, oh, if it's a homework, I don't have to worry about citing, but that may not be the professor's assumption. So always ask, particularly if you're a relatively new student, ask. If it involves writing and you're told to look at sources, do I need to cite? Do I need to cite my sources in this assignment? And what citation style should I use? And if you don't know what we mean by citation style, I'm going to talk about that in a few minutes. Sometimes professors will tell you, oh, it doesn't matter what citation style you use, just pick one and use it consistently. And we can talk about what to do then as well. Never cut and paste from a source into your paper. This is so easy to do when we're reading online, right? Highlight, cut, paste. I do it to make notes, right? I love this quote. I'm going to use this quote later, or this quote is kind of my big reminder about some of the ideas that I want to use from this text. Cut it and paste it, put it in my Evernote reading file, and it's there. It's so easy to do. But if you cut and paste into your paper, even if you swear to yourself that you're going to go back and reword it, etc. later, that's just one kind of easy step toward plagiarism. It's much harder, again, when you get short on time, when you have a lot to do. So if you never cut and paste things into your paper, then you don't have to worry about it. And then ask for help, right? So if you're not sure, certainly coming to the Writing Center and asking is one way to help. Ask your instructors, ask classmates to read things over. And there's other resources that we'll talk about as well. So what is proper citation then? This is the backside of that brochure. What do we mean by proper citation? First of all, what is a citation, right? So a citation is a signal to your reader that the information that you're sharing in your work, in your paper, came from another source. So in academic writing, we're always building on the ideas of others. That's kind of almost the definition of academic writing, that you are using the research of others, you're moving that research forward, you're referring to it, you're reflecting on it. So a citation is a way to let your reader know what you're building on, and to then clearly distinguish the ideas that you're using from another source and your ideas about that source, or your ideas in general. That's this kind of signal to your reader. And a citation includes two things in a paper. It's both a note in the body of the text, and that looks different in different citation styles, and I'll give you some examples. So a note in the body of your text, and then a reference list at the end. Sometimes that reference list is called reference, sometimes it's called bibliography, sometimes it's called works cited. It doesn't matter. As long as you have anything that you mention in the body of your paper should also be mentioned in that list at the end. Sometimes you have things in the list at the end that are not mentioned in the paper, that were kind of helped you think things through without being specifically referenced, but anything you mention in your paper has to be in your reference list. So I said styles, different citation styles. So here's just one example of what a citation looks like in the text, and then in the reference list at the end, right? So here is, can I still, sorry, I was trying to figure out if I could still draw, but when I'm sharing slides, evidently I can't also draw. Okay, well oops, what did I just do? That's okay. So where it says in text, right? Here's a quotation from a paper. Multiple mothering ideologies have been identified in the literature, including intensive mothering, the reference there, Hayes, 1996, competitive mothering, Toronto, 2001, combative mothering, Moore and Abbott, 2016, and integrated motherhood, Dow, 2016. So I just pulled the last one. So that reference in APA style. APA style gives the name of the author and the year it was published. APA is typically used in social sciences. And so that's what they care about, who wrote it, but also how recent it is. So that's what it looks like in the body of your paper. And then under reference on the other side, you see then that's what this last one that I've circled. This is the full reference that would go at the end of your paper. Dow and the initials, 2016, and then the whole name. So that's what a citation in your text and on your reference list looks like in APA style. Here's what it looks like in IEEE style. And I have each of these circled, right? So this is a Journal of Cybersecurity. And I think I had these animated, but I can't. The animation doesn't work when I'm using it as a background like this. So here's the introduction, though. The USA is in the midst of its most resounding policy shift on cyber conflict and profound implications for national security and the future of the internet. A vision statement by the U.S. Cyber Command and Cyber Strategy from the U.S. Department of Defense, DoD, conclude that since the U.S. cyber force are in persistent engagement, right? We're quoting all sorts of exact words. And then in this first big circle here, you see that's their reference, one. There's multiple references here, 1, 2, 3, and this is a different style, right? So, so this is clearly telling us, okay, these ideas came from someplace. And then, oops, I thought I had an animation of the resource list. Okay, I don't. Each of those numbers would need to have a corresponding item on your resource list or your reference list at the end. So citation style, always something in your text and always something at the end. Different ways to do it, but it has to be done. Well, why do we do all this? I started with the kind of how without thinking about why. So I said a little bit about why, right? That we're always working from a position that that we have a academic value of honesty. But a little more specifically, why do we cite sources? In the American education system, writers are expected to acknowledge with a citation both the words and the ideas of others. So again, a citation demonstrates, first of all, that you've done your research, right? That you pulled in other ideas, that this didn't just you didn't just invent this, you actually reflected on the work of others, and shows where you did that research and gives credit to your sources and also credibility to you as the author. Again, right? It tells your readers, whether that's a professor or a journal editor, journal reader, hey, this is what I read. See, I didn't just come up with these ideas. They're based in some actual sources. And then a citation style. So I mentioned this already. Again, a citation style is really just the specific format that you're using when you refer to a source. Typically different disciplines use different styles, and different styles reflect what different fields care about. So for instance, I showed you an example of APA, typically used by social sciences. And I said, they really care about who wrote this and how recent is it, right? The other example, IEEE, they care a little less about the who, and they often things are published electronically. So you could just kind of hover over the number and see the full reference. There's much less direct quotation often in IEEE, which is typically used by engineers. So they're all just different styles. And you just use one consistently unless you've been told to use one. So sometimes your professors will say, just use one. Typically, if they've said that, I would tend to use APA. That tends to be in policy and in the business school. I hear folks say, just use one. I would say use APA or Chicago are the kind of typical ones that are used in those fields. And then again, when do you include a citation? You need a citation every time you refer to the ideas of another in your text. So not just the words of another, but the ideas of another. So that might be when you include an idea that you learned from a source, when you write that you very directly, okay, I read this in this article, like the APA source we saw a few minutes ago here, I'm referring to this idea about motherhood and it came from this article. It might be when you summarize something you read somewhere. Might be when you use words directly from a source, like we saw in the cybersecurity example, right, where they were quoting directly from the US Department of Defense document. So it might be direct words, but it may also be ideas, and that's important to remember. So, and again, remember a citation is both in the body of the text and at the end in the reference list. So lots of times students will say, well, if I just change the words around, sometimes American students, I think somewhere taught this rule in high school that, well, you can't, it's plagiarism if you have 5 words in a row that are directly from the source. But if you just change the words around and substitute synonyms, that's not plagiarism anymore. Well, first of all, it may not be explicit plagiarism, but if you don't have a citation, it is, right? So if you use those words from a source, even if you change them, but you don't have a citation to demonstrate that the ideas came from a source, you're still plagiarizing. And often, so it's not really just enough usually to change words around, right? Really, the idea is you need to put it in your own words. And sometimes that can be pretty challenging to do. So one of the things I often tell students is, well, why are you pulling all of this in? Is it in fact that you're supposed to be using these words to shape your own ideas, not so much putting them in your text without having them be informing your thinking, right? So no, it's not okay to just change words around. You have to cite ideas. Those have to be in your own words. You can quote directly, as we saw actually in that article from the cybersecurity article where they quoted phrases. But in some disciplines, it's pretty uncommon to use direct quotations. Most engineering disciplines, for instance, it's pretty uncommon to use direct quotations. So there really is a preference to put things in your own words, to summarize and kind of nod to ideas with those in-text citations. All right, why do we care so much about plagiarism in the US? I'm just going to talk about this really quickly, right? So plagiarism in many ways is a really distinctly American concern. It's to some degree about ownership, right? About kind of capitalist ideas, ownership of ideas. And you probably, this is maybe getting a little bit old, but probably when I bring up this picture, people remember this idea that when Trump was running for president in 2016, Melania Trump gave a speech that was later recognized by someone in Michelle Obama's team as being using the exact words of Mrs. Obama's speech. And so Mrs. Trump was accused of plagiarism. And that was just the inspiration for this article, which talks about the concept of plagiarism. It's pretty modern, it's pretty 20th, 21st century idea, and it's very American, right? The concept of plagiarism, as we understand it, just didn't exist in ancient cultures, right? Texts referred to other texts all the time. Certainly in Western culture, I mean, the Odyssey is a retelling of the Iliad, or kind of takes up the same ideas as the Iliad. People could argue, and in fact have in literary studies, that the New Testament is a rewriting of the Old Testament, right? We didn't have the same kind of idea about texts in the ancient world, and certainly not about ownership ideas. So societies in which knowledge comes from divine revelation, right? There's an author, often didn't value individual ownership of words and ideas, but we really do in modern Western civilization. Right, we started to really care about ideas as intellectual property, right? The idea that what came out of your head could be owned in about the mid 19th century, right? Where we started to actually use that phrase, there's intellectual property, that the labors of your mind could be owned just as much as the wheat that you grew on your field, right? There's an idea that's not quite around 200 years old, so fairly modern. So that's why we care about it. We could spend a lot of time arguing whether we should, how capitalist it is, or anything else. But good citation is about more than just avoiding plagiarism, right? So it's not just, well, someone else owns those ideas and I can't use them because someone owns them, right? It really is also that kind of being a good academic citizen, right? It's acknowledging where they came from, It's also kind of helping to demonstrate what informed your thinking, what shaped your thinking, right? So it's acknowledging that the words and the ideas that we're using came from someplace. It's helping to establish our credibility as knowledgeable scholars. And then it's also giving whoever's reading our work a kind of roadmap to say, oh, that's an interesting idea. Oh, I see you got it from there. I'd be interested in hearing more about that, so I can follow your citations to go learn more. So essentially, academic writing is part of a conversation about ideas, and you including citations in your work about both ideas and exact words helps there to be that conversation. So let's talk about the more specifics of how to cite. So again, you're citing to communicate that you're having that conversation, you're engaged with a source, and your reader, when someone's reading your work, again, whether that's a professor or a journal editor or a journal reader, really expects to hear what you have to say in the paper, right? Your reader recognizes that you're joining that academic conversation, but really wants to has come to your paper to read your perspective. So you need to provide a clear idea of what's your perspective, right? Not just a whole list of here's what other people have said on this subject, but when you're talking about, well, here's what others have said, you're analyzing, synthesizing, commenting, discussing. You're not just plopping them in and saying, okay, here's a bunch of ideas, right? So that's how you're really constructing knowledge in your field and showing that you're part of that communication and conversation, sorry. So when your reader sees a citation, that's an indication that your idea has a source, but it's also an expectation that the words are your own expression of that idea, right? So they're not the direct words from the source. You should be concise when you're referring to other texts, right? Again, someone's come to your work to hear what you have to say. So offer an honest paraphrase, make it clear where the ideas are yours and where there's some from another source. And don't ever expect the sources to do your work for you. This is something I see a lot, especially in writers as they're coming into a discipline, right? Oh my gosh, how could I possibly say anything better than this thing that I read, right? But the work of you pulling those sources into your writing is to show your thinking about it, right? Whether it's for a paper that you're being evaluated on, again, or something you're sending off for publication. Someone's come to your work to hear your ideas, right? So it's not really enough to just say, okay, here's a whole bunch of ideas from somebody else. Like we often do that thinking we can't possibly write this as well as someone else. But again, the goal of a paper is for you to come up with ideas. So make it clear what your ideas are, how you're using your sources. That's not only good citation, but it's good writing. And then there's different roles that we could say, if this may help you think about, well, when do I really need to cite something? We could say there's different roles for sources. All of these need to be cited, whatever these roles are, but sometimes you just want to get the gist of something, right? So a very general idea about a claim, right? You're just kind of pointing to the general idea. Here's this main idea from this whole article, right? This article is about something, right? Giving that really the gist of it. Sometimes you're just mentioning it, a source, right? Like these people talk about this idea, right? You're really just kind of pointing to a source really broadly, maybe saying something about its general ideas. Sometimes you're talking about an idea and you're including, well, these are people in parentheses. Here are people that have also talked about this. So just providing a citation. Sometimes, excuse me, you really are engaging very specifically with the words from a passage. And so you want to get, you really are focusing on a specific passage or a specific idea. And so you are paraphrasing, you're putting it in your own words. And then occasionally, in most disciplines, it's only occasionally, you really do want a direct quotation. You want someone else's words to show up in your paper because they bring a certain way to say it, because you really need the clarity of what they've said, because your interpretation depends on what they've said. But use those pretty sparingly, unless you're in literary studies where, you know, if I'm going to talk about a paper by Shakespeare, I have to quote Shakespeare pretty extensively. When you're looking at other sources that aren't primary sources, usually you're doing that direct quoting pretty infrequently. But I'm going to run through some examples of all of these just so that you get an idea of what they look like. And again, it doesn't, no one's going to test you on, gee, was that a gist or a citation only? I'm really kind of providing these to help you think about how you're using sources. So this one, in fact, was kind of the gist of things, right? This example that I showed you before, right? Multiple mothering ideologies have been identified in the literature. And so each of these intensive mothering, and here's the citation, competitive mothering, combative mothering, integrated motherhood, right? This was the general gist of each of these sources, right? So for Hayes, it was intensive mothering. For Toronto, it was competitive mothering. So really that's just the general gist, the main idea. This I would say is a kind of mention, right? Here's a different, this is an article. This is from an article that was just quoted in the last slide. Stone and Williams each provided nuanced analysis of how dominant cultural and structural forces in the workplace are in tension with those of the family, right? So they're just kind of mentioning them, right? It's not an in-depth analysis of them, but kind of, again, a general idea, mentioning their name and what they're connected to. And then at the end, we're really just getting an example of citation only, right? Often favoring male workers and constraining women's choices. And here's just this list. We see this a lot in social sciences and in hard sciences too. Like this kind of work has come before, and here it all is, or not all of it, but the important ones that I'm referring to. So mention only, citation only. And here's more citation only examples, right? Children are exposed prenatally and in early childhood to multiple environmental stressors that can adversely affect their cognitive ability, academic performance, and consequent educational trajectories, adult health, wealth, and social status. And then we have two notes there. It's two different sources. So again, that's just, here's where these ideas have come from. Here's the citations that help me develop these ideas. Same for the rest of the paragraph too. Although I think this last one actually estimated annual cost, that probably does have a more specific information. Oh, and there's the, sorry, I did have this one in, right? So here's the gist, or the citation only, I mean, right, of that sentence. And here then is the sources for those ideas. So the in-text citation and then the reference list at the end. And then here's a paraphrase. So sorry, these were animated and something happened to the animation, but ignoring the stuff on the yellow for just a minute, here's the original source. This is from an article by professors in the College of Education, Kim Griffin. Ackerman, DiRimaio, and Garza Mitchell found that student veterans listed starting college as the most difficult transition out of the military they experienced. Yet, according to Cook and Kim, only 22% of schools provide veteran-specific transition support. So here's a paraphrase. So what I have in yellow is the original, right? The Ackerman, DiRimaio, and Garza 2009. Here's the exact sentence that this is paraphrasing. So we could say that what's in yellow is the original. The focus of our study was the transition that combat veterans make when they become college students. For many with whom we spoke, their transition, this was the most difficult transition of all. And so we can see in the white, the paraphrase, that the main idea is there, certainly veterans, starting college, difficult transition. Two sentences, however, have been combined into a pretty less than a whole sentence, right? We're actually talking about two sources here. So there's a good paraphrase, right? These authors, they found some words obviously have to stay the same, right? That kind of, first of all, either jargon or identifying words, right? So they're not changing the words for veterans, they're not changing the word for college students, but the idea is being paraphrased, put in Professor Griffin and Professor Gilbert's own words. And here's the paraphrase of the second, and here's the original of this second part. Yet, According to Cook and Kim, only 22% of schools provide veteran-specific transition support. And again, in yellow, here's the original. Only 22% of institutions with programs and services for military personnel have developed an expedited re-enrollment process to help students restart their academic efforts, most, etc. So we can see, again, a very brief, they got the core of the information. 22% of schools, 22% of institutions provide veteran-specific transition support. So here's another good paraphrase. And this is APA style. And then sometimes we're using direct quotations, again, often used with more frequency in the humanities. So this is Professor Psyche Williams-Forsum, who's in the American Studies Department. This is a book that she wrote a little over a decade ago. And here's an example of a direct quotation, right? So here's a passage from this book. And here we can see, right, with the proceeds of these sales, the women went on to purchase a better way of life for themselves and their families. As Winston put it, my mother paid for this place with chicken legs. We first lived in a log cabin that burned almost 50 years ago, and we rebuilt further from the road, right? This is a direct quotation precisely representing the original source, right? She's done interviews there, right? You can see here, these have been interviews with people, not done by the author, but quoted. And so we're getting, it's important to have the exact words that someone said, because we're basing the research on that exact, on the exact wording. So that's when using a direct quotation. Here's another example. I don't know how well you can see this example. On the right in white, this is an article of from a journal, and I don't know how well. Oh, here I wrote it here. I pulled out a sentence here, right? On the one hand, here's the title: Black Women, Beauty, and Hair as a Matter of Being. On the one hand, scholars in the Caribbean, Britain, and the United States speak of the importance given to the dominant beauty paradigm, which, quote, privileges, quote, white, light skin, straight hair, and what are seen to be European facial features. And then they've quoted Tate, 301. And then here at the bottom, that's what the note, the citation on the reference list looks like. So again, here, a direct quotation from this source, because this author, Cheryl Thompson, wanted the exact words, right? It was important to use those words and not paraphrase them for whatever reason she decided that was important. So again, kind of building on the ideas of others. So it's acceptable. What's acceptable use? What's good? You're avoiding plagiarism. A good summary with a citation, a good paraphrase with a citation, a direct quotation with a citation, right? All of those, and you know, you're referencing things, a gist, a mention, etc. All of them with a citation. So I've one like exercise. We can kind of see if I have a quotation, or have some examples from an article. So this is an article a few years old now about from the Harvard Business Review about pricing good barbecue. I figured it was around lunchtime. So here's an article, or rather, here's the conclusion of that article. It was all about the article in general. You can see what America's best barbecue joint can teach you about pricing. So it talks about this Aaron Franklin, proprietor of the Franklin Barbecue in Austin, Texas, and talks about the fact that he prices his barbecue. He's been judged, he's won lots of awards for his cooking. He's been judged to be the best barbecue in Austin, Texas, but he does not charge the most. Right, there's other restaurants that actually charge more. So what is his pricing strategy? And his pricing strategy is a few things, right? I'm not going to be the highest because things change in economics, lots of ways. And because my clients have memory, and they want to have some sense of a bargain, but also that they're paying for quality. And they have a memory of if I raise prices too much, they may not come back. So here's the conclusion. There are two key issues to consider before boosting prices during a period of strong demand, like if you're a barbecue guy that just won all sorts of awards and now there's a ton of demand for your barbecue, and why don't you just hike up your prices? Two key issues to consider before boosting prices during a period of strong demand. First, how confident are you that good times will last? Second, what initiatives should be taken today so if need be, prices can be gracefully rolled back? for many businesses, it makes sense to forego a few extra dollars of momentary profit and instead follow what Aaron Franklin, that's the proprietor of the barbecue place, practices in both setting prices as well as smoking meat. Go low and slow, right? So that low and slow refers to how he cooks his barbecue. You cook it for a long time at a low temperature. So it's a nice kind of way to stylistically end this article, right? Change your prices, keep them low, and change them slowly, just like you would barbecue your meat. Okay, so that's the conclusion. This is the paragraph. If I were to ask you to, if you were writing a paper somehow about pricing and barbecue, and you wanted to reference this paragraph, there's a few ways that you could do it. And I'm going to give you some examples. You're going to see if they're right or not. So here's one. And again, on the left under in the smaller print under Harvard Business Review, there's the original for your reference. So here's a way to do this. A 2015 article in the Harvard Business Review suggests that two considerations, namely confidence in pricing and how a price increase can be retracted later, are key to any decision to raise prices in a time of high demand. And so is that a good citation or not? I'll let you think about it for a second. Actually, if anybody wants to answer, anybody want to put it in the chat? Is that a good citation? Properly done or not? Anybody want to try? Should have done a poll. All right, I'm going to give it away. I would say this is good, right? It's not plagiarized. Yep, it's definitely paraphrased. Yep. Specific words and terms are not lifted from the original. The source is clearly acknowledged, right? We get it both kind of in the introduction, a 2015 article in the Harvard Business Review, and there's a clear citation. There's a good summary or a good paraphrase. Either sometimes one summary or a paraphrase is hard. So usually you would say a summary is of a longer piece of text, a paraphrase of a smaller piece. This is kind of in between. So it's a good summary and there's proper citation, right? Okay, let's try another one. Rafi Mohammed, 2015, a pricing strategy consultant, argues, that was the name of the author of the article, Rafi Mohammed. A pricing strategy consultant argues that, quote, for many businesses, it makes sense to forego a few extra dollars of momentary profit in favor of establishing and maintaining customer relations. Plagiarized or not? Right, I'm gonna give it to you. Going once, going twice. Not good. Thanks. Yeah. Why not? Because, oops. Sorry. Again, not plagiarized. Clearly acknowledges the source. We get his name, we get the year, and there's direct words are used, but we get a quotation, right? There's a clear quotation. It's very clear where the idea came from and exactly which words belong to the original, right? So it's properly used, quoted information, and there's a citation. Good. All right, whoops. Oh, that one did not. Well, there's another one, and I didn't scroll out. I don't know what's going on with my slides. All right, how about this? Businesses should make pricing decisions thoughtfully. This one's a little tricky, right? Is this plagiarized? It kind of depends, right? So first of all, probably all of us could probably come up with the idea that businesses should make pricing decisions thoughtfully, right? It's not like the most original idea in the world. So maybe it doesn't need to be cited, right? Maybe you don't need citation, but it kind of depends, right? If you already knew this, if it was an idea that was talked about in class, et cetera, then it's probably fine to just say it, right? But if you really want to be, but if you learned about it in this article, if you will want to cite it, and there's no clear citation here. So again, sometimes we want to make it really clear where our ideas came from to help demonstrate how we came to an idea. So technically this one probably isn't plagiarized, but it's also not really great citation practice, right? It's a good summary of the main idea, but it's not, there's no citation. So it really kind of depends how you want to use this. This is something that tricks students up all the time, that what's common knowledge in a discipline. This is probably common knowledge, but often I see common knowledge as a kind of foundation, still noted, like how do I know that businesses should make pricing decisions thoughtfully? Well, it comes from this theory or that theory or this article. Questions about any of that? Because that one's a tricky one. Let me go through my last few so we have time for questions. Here's another one. Like a good chef preparing tasty barbecue, a business should go low and slow when making decisions about setting prices. Plagiarized or not? Yes, exactly. So this one is plagiarized for a number of reasons. Whoops. Right. It is the source is not acknowledged. There's no citation at all. So when no one tells me someone else, Mohammed said this, then I'm left to think, oh, you wrote this yourself, right? So the reader is left to assume that the words belong to the author of this paper, not the author of this Harvard Business Review. And the words are a little too close. So, right, if I go back, we get this like low and slow, right? That reference, it's a little too close. A business should go low and slow when making decisions about setting prices. They've kind of flipped the order around, but that's really not a good paraphrase. So this one is definitely plagiarized. And then how about this one? Most businesses should consider two questions when deciding prices. First, how confident are they that the good times will last? And second, what initiatives should be taken now so if need be, prices can be gracefully rolled back? And there's a citation. So is this one plagiarized? This is one that trips students up a lot. So this one is in fact still plagiarized. Yes, it is. Because even though there's a citation, the citation tells me very clearly, okay, ideas came from somewhere. But the language in this passage is almost identical, right? So it's plagiarized. There's more than a few words that are lifted directly from the source. The wording is just too close. So what this is telling the reader is, oh, the idea came from Muhammad, but the words are mine as the author. But that's not accurate. The words are also Muhammad's, right? So the passage really should be paraphrased, or you can use a direct quotation if your field uses direct quotations. All right, so again, when do you cite a source? Every time you refer to the words or ideas of others, direct quotations, figures, data, statistics, anything you discovered in a source. And the same for ideas, theories, methodologies that you're using from a source. All of that needs citation. When in doubt, cite. Very few professors may occasionally say, you cited this a lot, or you don't need to cite this. Very, very rarely. Occasionally you'll get that, but very rarely. More often, students fail to cite as much as they need to. And then remember too, that a reference has to be both in your text and at the end. And anytime that you have a reference in your text, it has to also be at the end, right? And if you have a citation in your reference list at the end, it usually needs to be clear how it's coming about in your source, except if you're being asked to provide a bibliography. But if you're asked for, if your instructor tells you references or a works cited list, then things should be in both places. Again, occasionally you're asked for a bibliography, and that's this kind of wider body of text that maybe helped inform your thinking, but you haven't directly referred to. Sometimes you often have bibliographies in a dissertation because a lot of things have informed your thinking. And that is the end of my slide. So I seem to not have a question slide, but I'm just going to stop sharing and see if there are questions. So I didn't talk about self-plagiarism, but I can if that's a question for anybody. But are any other questions first about anything? Maybe while people are thinking of questions, I will be, for example, of direct quotations, shouldn't more of the text be in quotes? So however much of the, I can't remember which one I used before. So the words that you used from the source should be in quote, set off in quotation marks, right? So quotation marks tell me someone else said this. And so the words that, did I have something not quite right? I can't remember. I probably have things correct, but I'm not sure which slide you're referring to. So in a paraphrase, you don't need quotation marks. So quotation marks are only for exact words, right? So you don't need quotation marks, but you always need a citation. So even if you paraphrase the ideas of a source, then you still need to have a citation, right? So all those examples that we saw that were just mention only, etc., always need a citation. So self-plagiarism, just really quickly, self-plagiarism, I think, is a challenging concept for graduate students, especially at the doctoral level, because you're often building on your own body of work. But self-plagiarism at this level is really very specifically something. It means you are attempting to get credit twice for work you only did once. So it's self-plagiarism. If you are taking a seminar this semester, you write, or you're taking a class this semester, you write a paper. Next semester, you're taking a different class, and you wanna still be writing about the same topic, and you take this semester you wrote a 10-page paper. Next semester you have a 15-page paper. So next semester you take your 10 pages and you add 5 more. That's self-plagiarism, because you've essentially not done all of the work that you were required to do, and you've tried to get credit for it twice. Now, it would not be self-plagiarism if you went to your professor next semester and said, "Professor, I want to write on this topic. I wrote about this last semester in Professor so-and-so's class. Can I use the work again?" Your professor would probably say, "Well, you can't exactly use the paper again, but you can build on it." So what academics do all the time is take their ideas and build on them and recycle them and develop them further. That's not self-plagiarism, but you trying to turn in the same thing or parts of the same thing from multiple opportunities for credit is. Now, when you write your dissertation abstract, when you write your dissertation proposal, and then you go to apply for a conference, you will go back to your dissertation proposal and you will take sentences directly out of your dissertation proposal and send it off as a proposal for for that conference. That's not self-plagiarism, because that's you taking your ideas, putting them in a new situation, and demonstrating that that's the expectation, right? You're going to keep building on your dissertation work. That's a slightly different situation. So self-plagiarism, I think oftentimes students worry about it. At the graduate level, it really just means you can't turn things in twice for credit once. You have to do new work every semester. That's for graduate students. That's almost always what self-plagiarism is. Any other questions? How to do an in-text citation, how to do an in-text citation in Chicago style when paraphrasing. Chicago is not my expertise. The in-text in Chicago uses footnotes, then you have a footnote. Exactly. So whatever the style for Chicago is not a style I'm very fluent with. So, but yes, Chicago uses footnotes. Then you have a footnote. Sometimes they're explanatory footnotes, but for a paraphrase, it probably is the footnote and then the list in your reference list at the end. Other questions? I'm going to put my email in the chat one more time in case people do have questions later. Feel free to send me an email.
All right. Well, it looks like there's no more questions. Dr. McCree, thank you so much for another terrific workshop. You've done this for many years now, and I see you make improvements every year and kind of change with the times. So thank you so much. Thank you to our attorney, Zach Mundy, for his input. And thank you to everyone who joined us. I hope that you enjoy these workshops. Please note that we do not have a Gradulting workshop next week. We took 1 week off, so we'll be back in 2 weeks with a workshop on green cards. Help me learn how to get a green card. And immigration attorney Patricia Minicon will be presenting that workshop. And finally, please remember to do the 6-second survey and watch for an email from us with all the resources from this workshop. So thanks, everyone. Have a great week, and let us know if we can help you.
Thanks, Debbie.
Thank you, Linda.